Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SPReacts, where today we have ourselves 3 tracks from an act named Cicada. The first of these titled Qingadao, and if we switch over to here, hopefully I'm not mispronouncing that, we have the audio here, 3 tracks. This is a 2-piece as I understand it. Cicada with Solomon, who does apparently a lot of the vocals as well as partial mixing and adding to the music, and we've also got another mate of theirs who helps out with other things as well. I previously reviewed a track of theirs titled Malnourished, if I'm not mistaken. I had a good time with that. Be good to hear more. We're going to listen through these 3 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's do it. Let's go. Nice bit of tension there harmonically. That's a cool response within the different vocal styles. Interesting panning of those distorted takes as well, with the way they're presented in violin. Vocal layers on top. Because those would be sense when they're the wows. That was interesting because it felt like a lot of that was kind of meandering about trying to find a position for itself, like it didn't necessarily want to resolve to anything, and that's not a criticism. We're going to talk about this track in this little sort of mini conclusion, because in this mini conclusion we're going to be providing each of the track its own sort of little mini song analysis from lyrics and vocals all the way through a production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally there'll be like an overall review at the end or conclusion section for all 3 tracks, and then my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this track is about? So after having a quick look through the lyrics, I think this track, if I'm not mistaken, is discussing asking if someone's going to try and find the truth in something, or if they're going to put them on display for what they think they are. You're basically giving them an ultimatum there. And I think the track more or less is trying to emphasize the mystery or the uncertainty that the vocalist or the storyteller is going through as they describe this. The lyrics are visceral, you know, spoon feed me the truth I need to know, or cut my wings and put me on display, and walk through the fields of falling liquid and hope that the shame will turn to mush in an instant. Yeah, so it's still kind of ambiguous. It's still kind of vague. It's clearly very personal to the people who are writing this, but I kind of like the fact that it's so intimate whilst being so mysterious. It's not too on the nose, you know, but it kind of incentivizes you. It seems quite intelligent. The vocal performance is relatively, it's got this filtering on it which makes it seem very sort of bright and like it's a phone call or something like that, like it's someone discussing things from you far away, like it seems kind of distant. We're very comfortable in a hidden chest voice and we exhibit good vocal technique, but it's also very kind of like it's low key, it's deliberately a bit more sort of calm and patient, but that could also represent tiredness. And there's some lovely sort of main vocal lines within that mid-range, but we develop ourselves in our upper ranges as we stack for harmonies later on the piece in certain parts, and we also have these call and responses where we sort of like hum or sing a harmony there, and it becomes almost melancholic in a sense. But I feel like I leave this track after listening through it with the understanding that I didn't necessarily get all the words through clearly because of how enmeshed the vocals are with everything else within the arrangement in the post-production. I think that was a deliberate response. Like, it's more meant to sort of represent this kind of this ether that it's a part of. It's not meant to be too distant from that. Like you're in the mind of the person trying to figure this stuff out, going through the mist or the darkness. You just left with a feeling of it being kind of surreal and otherworldly. The track itself at 2 minutes 53 is right within that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot where it's not too short to be devoid of enough sufficient context, and it's not too long that we risk overstaying or overplaying things. It consists of a variety of different guitar, bass, drum, and synth textures, if I'm not mistaken, with some interesting violining and additional separate distinct textures within the instrument, such as the various sort of like strummed clean guitars there with the distorted kind of whomps coming on either side of the stereo field there. We have some rotary reverb on certain guitar takes as well with the octave chords, and now a nice little bit of glow in the mid-range. But I like the tone and how honest and earnest the guitars are. They're not overproduced, those steel strings, and I think that it's a nice contrast to the rotaries and how they oscillate and come between. I think the sound of the drums is fantastic as well. It's not just that we're very sort of comfortable with that slow kind of meandering eighth note groove there, but it's like it's got this kind of bus compression on it, which makes it seem like it's within a chamber, and you do kind of hear an emptiness to that tone with the different cymbal kick and snare patterns. And that main sort of eighth note groove continues throughout as you walk through the facility that Cicada have created here. It's an interesting experience. It's quite intense despite how, again, like restrained or constrained the vocals are. Even with those brighter textures, such as around the 1 minute 05 mark there, with the buzzing of certain guitars and how they vibrate and kind of wriggle around in the frequency spectrum in the center of the stereo field, there's just this tension there. It's kind of working with some sevenths, but the chord progressions that we have, and we'll talk about that in a moment, I suppose, in the theme section there, it just kind of doesn't seem to want to anchor itself. I think there's a harshness that sort of distills more of an intensity and sort of frustration that maybe the vocals are trying to sort of suggest because of how tired they are with the situation they're in, and how they're just saying, just do it, just cut my wings, you know. They've just been through so much that they're just exhausted at this point, and so the music is trying to communicate that for them. There's lots of dynamic range within this piece. There's some parts where sort of things just kind of sit and still and you kind of absorb things, and with other points you're just kind of walking along with them. There's enough variety between the various sort of sections there, with it being sort of vocal or not vocal oriented to a sort of not have any filler. The performance overall is quite tight, and there's a lot of range to the various sort of like bass parts as well. I like how they dance around in the lower end there and punctuate some of the mids occasionally. The guitars have varied ways of expressing themselves as well without trying to overwhelm or sort of overdo the vocals. There's even some shakers around the 1 minute 20 or 30 mark, and they might have come in earlier, but it's just a nice sort of sub 16th note groove there to adjust the sort of experience within the track. And I think is that a final note, there's some pulses, wow, they're going inside the stereo field, that as much a production thing as a compositional thing, an experiential thing. You really do just kind of feel that there's this bubbling and murmuring underneath the surface that is trying to be implied so much is forced upon you. And I think you'd get a different and more sort of engaged experience potentially listening to this more than the one time. I think that little kind of ukulele part near the end is kind of intriguing because it goes to like a major, but like you can tell that thematically it's minor oriented, despite how there's maybe some parallels or chromatics are outside the diatonics or tension chords. It's really just maybe trying a whole bunch of different angles with different chord triads and types there to sort of like instill a reaction or response from the person they're telling the story to, before things just kind of peter out and fade out. And it's just a really interesting tale there, and you really have to pay close attention to understand it. And there's just and it's not like a production perspective. And it's not a production perspective thing insofar as it's more of an effects chase. We maybe even have some like wah pedals or so like some effects on the guitars which form those emphases. And it's just kind of charming the way that we are using this instrument with so many different sort of ways and styles. The studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering is fantastic. I like the way that it's presented. It's definitely kind of it's got a grittiness to it, despite how well it is leveled within the stereo field and frequency spectrum. There's no resonant frequencies. I mean, to be fair, the pulse that you get on the sides of the stereo field is a deliberate thing, so I wouldn't say that's an accident. Music surrounds you. The sides of the headphones, there's bits that go backwards and forwards there. There's dynamic range compositionally, production-wise, that doesn't sound choked. I again, just from the drums at the start there's a kind of ghostliness which implies a sense of space there, which is really nice. And they're deliberately playing with the listeners. They're messing with the listener with how they present the different sounds, textures, and timers within it, and the different varying intensities and the pulse and groove. So I like that. I appreciate what we're trying to accomplish here. The EQing is done well. Bus compression limiting is handled nice and loud, not out of place. Yeah, really good start to proceedings. Very interesting song. So we have Terminal Lucidity, track number 2 next. Is that a different drum kit again? Loving our guitar arpeggios and extensions.
Flying like a cicada, oh no. I fly towards the light from the shadows, and transdermal juices grown and blood flow. The undergrowth tree is where I made a home. The noise will start up soon, yeah. Come with words from April to July. The sun no feeling I'm having up tonight will, oh, surely change my life. To my comatose, darkness seems to fall into a shadow. As the sun rose high into the clouds above, I am lost behind eyes like black holes.
Oh, that's surreal. Because you're just modulating that major arpeggio up, the third step's bum, 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 or down. It sounds like the bass is going up, but the top note is going down.
Can you hear vibrations?
It is, yeah.
Through April to July. This unheard feeling I'm having now tonight will, oh, surely shift my life. Change my life, 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 change my life.
Intriguing sound with that high squeakiness there. So, like, I appreciate what we're trying to do here. It sounds a little bit squeezed. I understand that the vocals are trying to sound like they're underneath the guitar or like they're a part of it. You could have potentially have like, but then I know I'm gonna respect the artistic vision here. It's all good.
This is prehistoric. And I ask you this.
Yeah, because they're deliberately panning there.
Like, why do you think we roll bags? You think these swarms are for the fun of it? I would tell you that you don't roll deep enough. But every time you swarm, they shoot. And that'll get you some wings, son. It'll get you some wings.
Surreal. I know I've said surreal a lot. It's just really interesting experience with this. I don't really listen to a lot of music like, or I haven't been sent through a lot of music like this stuff I'm listening to from Cicada. It's very good. And so for track 2, Terminal Lucidity, and again, I have another look through the lyrics here, I kind of appreciate, or think this track is more discussing the way they fly towards the light as cicadas, maybe following on from Qingadao, where they're kind of discussing someone trying to see the truth through the darkness. It's more they're trying to fly towards it and trying to understand maybe the lucidity they experience being that close to death, or that close to being in the dead night. I've seen what they make of you, how they render your multiplicity of mistakes. They've undone me as well, pulled back my shell and feast on my flesh, claimed it was our own survival, and they wonder why only show. Yeah, so it's more like we take a risk when we fly towards the light as well, and we're kind of aware of that as we maybe have made the fatal mistake of doing so at the wrong time. But we're sort of looking at it at the same time as if it was an important thing done that in the first place, because we just needed to. Like, what else is there? And I mean, I think I might be misinterpreting that, and I apologize if I am. It's just a very interesting story, in part because of how the vocals change as we go through the piece. There are some spoken ones, such as near the end with the fuzz of like the guitar solo, like underneath or the kind of the guitar riff. But you have various parts of those as well where there's spoken elements, and then there are other parts where kind of singing alongside of it. I just think with a longer track like this, alongside again having competent vocal technique, using interesting effects on the vocals, like I think we've got a bit of distortion on some of those sort of like side tracks or something like that. But just like having that variation there can make a track more sort of like, I suppose, exciting, or not necessarily exciting, that's the wrong word, more special. It has even, you're going to retain attention through like the adjustment of that lead layer. But there's also this kind of similar vocal style, this kind of smokiness to it with the way it's produced and presented that is consistent stylistically and texturally to Qingadao. And I like that that's happening across tracks. I think that's really cool. It helps to more sort of like accurately sort of pitch where they're going and a kind of vibe, quote unquote, for what they're trying to accomplish with this project. It can be kind of distracting if we have lots of different interpretations or sort of representations of a vocal track, you know, like different sort of like ways of production of producing it. So I like that consistency there. The use of double tracks and sort of main parts there, and again adjusting to those spoken layers are really good. I also really dig the fact that we allowed the instrumental components to have their space as well, even on a longer track like this. This track has absolutely no patience, by the way, in terms of being, again, over 4 minutes, and it brings in everything immediately. You've got those drums that are even more sort of bombastic and choked than before. There's a reverb tail to some of those snares there, and there are these arpeggiated, modulated guitar riffs that move up with the bass line as they do down. Well, no, the vocals were going down in that sort of midsection, because there was a really interesting midsection where the vocals, they were playing alongside the guitar parts, and everything was kind of constricting and going back outward, like kind of wings opening and closing. But I just like how pretty that is, really. It's nice when we can modulate and just stick with the major, but not make it too bright or sort of make it too cheesy sounding. And I think, again, it's that parallel major that you put at the end there through the modulation that kind of makes it seem a bit more sort of distinct as well, because it's a bit less common to sort of go outside the diatonic in situations like these. It kind of highlights an effervescence, maybe like a focus on the light outside of what we're discussing with the vocals, despite the heaviness of it. The bass line is nice and thick and rigid underneath there. It's while I say it's rigid, it's more like it's got a solid sense of body to it. It does sort of dance around underneath and move when it needs to, and it's got a great sense of reliance and sort of awareness of the drums as well. You know, they're fairly respectful of each other as we have a consistency with that sort of drum groove. And I think we also have like the similar kind of bass line and chord progression across the entirety of the song. It's just the vocals represent themselves differently over the top. There are some interesting bits of air candy candy, such as the squeakiness of the kind of maybe this supposed to be the cicada sounds around about 2 minutes of that. So that's really cool. I like that. It was cool synth design. I think having the drums completely disappear around that 3-minute 45 mark is really cool. I like that a lot, primarily because it just allows you to pay more attention to the vocals, especially when you have the guitar line over top. I think there have been interesting sort of like arrangement and sort of like compositional decisions with having both of those things there. I just think we really kind of want to make it a bit kind of like complicated sounding maybe. Because you could have easily just had the vocals without, but maybe they thought they'd sound a bit too empty. And you have the vocals coming in over top there, and we just have a really kind of elegant sort of bluesy phrasing there, almost like we're working through the difficulties that we're discussing along that part. Like the guitar is singing along to what it sort of hears from the spoken parts. With the pentatonics being sort of respected, hammer-ons and pull-offs, etc. It's really cool. Really elegant guitar work. The use of the buzz, the sort of noise as well, is really intense. Around that 4-minute 20 marker, or just through the outro general, it's just the noise gets louder and louder as you go through, and it's kind of a bit of an uncomfortable sensation, but then you kind of attribute it directly to the vocal take, and it's almost meant to sound like a lot older than it is, a lot more sort of like it's a distant, like it's a memory that we're kind of fuzzy on, you know, or like a crackled signal that we're trying to get through, and it's trying its best to be able to be heard, to be able to make sense of that situation, especially when you get told that you'll get your wings. And there's other sounds that follow, little kind of clicks and sort of like interesting synth sequences and other elements around the 2-minute 30 mark, as well as in other parts of the track. There's just a lot of little nuances there. They're really sort of spoiling the listener, especially, you know, with a longer track like this, you can't afford to have any sort of unclaimed real estate. But yeah, it's just a really beautiful part with that pause around the 1:30 mark there, just the space without that drums, just to be able to sort of appreciate that. And we do have points of pause throughout other parts of the track though. It's good to not have the hypnotic rhythm the entire time. When it returns, you appreciate it more. Gives the listener a moment to process things. Thematically, again, the major modulations elicit a feeling of like a sense of hope, despite the struggles or tribulations that we're going through, even though we're going through some harrowing stuff. A lot of the darkness comes through the vocals and the kind of dustiness and kind of discord and distortion of some of the elements there. But I think they're trying to sort of communicate different moods with different things. And I think overall, if you'd gone for like minors throughout the entire thing, it just would have been too on the nose and a little bit kind of like a little bit too much maybe, even though I would have respected the artistic decision regardless. Ultimately, yeah, no, just really cool use of harmonic, the parallel major, should I say, for that final chord. And I think it was strong enough with everything else to be able to pull forward another really strong performance with a note out of place. Studio production, recording, mixing and mastering. Again, all the different vocal interpretations, effects changes with distortions, EQing, reverbs, etc. are very, very good. Nothing but love for the effort put in to make those interesting and different positions that they were placed. I like the panning of the vocals on the side there and that sort of ending part there, with it being asymmetrical, because it just kind of doesn't try to further compete with the guitar solos, lead guitar parts, or the spoken vocals in that bit. We're aware that maybe there is just maybe a little bit too much there, and it makes it sort of seem very sort of like very calculated, but in a positive way. There's clear, sensible decision making. Most of the instruments within this track, and as well as Qingadao, they have deliberate augmentation to further the mood that Cicada want to provide. Ultimately really satisfied with it. It's just very creative post stuff, as well as the actual recording being solid. Not a note out of place. Similar comments to before, just great consistency across the studio side. Finally, we have Afterlife, track number 3.
They say that it's all smoke and mirrors.
think that's the first thing I potentially disagreed with. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have done it. It's just that's very harsh. And I'm wondering if we could have just potentially have lowered that just point. But that was probably a deliberate thing on their part. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt because of how well they produce their music.
Time won't wait for us. We'll fade into the past. There's a place up above that'll surely take us and we say that it's all smoke and mirrors. I say it's really quite simple. We'll grow old, hearts are bound together. How is that complicated? And I say that I will see you in my afterlife. And the more that I try, I find that it's true.
They're very clever. See, there's some really interesting stuff going on in there. For track number 3, Afterlife, what do we think this one's about? I think that it's basically saying that it's kind of accepting maybe our existence in this life and the understanding that there could be an afterlife. And we're saying, hey, you know, we're just going to work stuff out as we go along. This is what they talk about. And we'll look for a place and we'll find it and we'll just see how it goes. You know, we're just going to do our best to deal with reality and hopefully there's something different when we get there. You know, that there's a place up above that'll surely take us in. And it's interesting that they're looking for that. I kind of feel like it follows on from Terminal Lucidity and Qingadao in a little bit. We'll talk about that in the end, but I think that the vocals here have a similar presentation to previous ones. We are comfortable in a hidden chest voice there. We have distortion and kind of fuzzy effects that make it seem a bit more sort of distant and discordant. We're deliberately going for a kind of a brittle aesthetic with it. We're just playing with colors effectively. We've got a lot of tools in our palette and we're experimenting. I think it's cool. It does make the vocals sound more distinct, to be fair. And just the way that they're presented is just interesting with how they're filtered and EQ'd as well there. But yeah, we have a variety of different melodies and harmonies that exist within this 2-minute 48 track, and we don't. Again, there's no filler. But we also, again, as I mentioned here, we're just allowing enough space for the instruments to breathe on their own, especially with another really fascinating guitar progression here. The chords are sort of really, like, we have majors and minors, but then we also have some like flat ninths or something like that, or some ninth chords there, and we have moments of tension, and we just clearly understand our more advanced sort of harmonies, you know, songwriting and composition. I like that we're not afraid to instill a sense of kind of like confusion maybe or uncertainty within that, and we're not sort of like wanting to be too safe about it. I mean, like, we have these strummed guitars at the start there, and I just think it would have been kind of a bit too vanilla if we had been afraid of maybe sort of like adding again those extensions or sort of chromatics there. A bit of clashiness occasionally. With the gentleness of the guitars, you can get away with that. It doesn't sound too aggressive. You know, coming in with the rim clicks around the 30-second mark is really cool because it's less aggressive than the snares that we've had prior, which it shows we're trying to be a bit more gentle, especially with the hi-hats as well. With some occasional kind of like tom fills working with those 8ths and not syncopated 16ths before the big kind of riser thing going into the chorus. Now, what I'm not necessarily as sure about is how we kind of, it's very kind of feral sounding when the vicious, those really heavily sort of like distorted and driven guitars coming on the sides of the stereo field. I'm still not entirely sure I like how they rise on the sides, but that's a very subjective thing. I'm just not sure how it necessarily benefits. I could be missing the specific lyric that's referring or representing to, maybe that's us trying to reach up towards the sky, trying to find that afterlife. I'm not sure. We kind of oscillate between the middling kind of like vocals and the bass parts, with the bass being a bit more active or sort of like easy to sort of like digest in this one. I kind of dig how it's sort of got its own sort of sense of interdependence. And our falsetto that we have in parts like the 148 is just a great sort of layering technique with the vocals. I like how we're not sort of afraid to explore our full range. And that fade out as we go through it, especially into the end, is just charming. Like, not just from a post-production technique, but it just kind of shows when we've come to a conclusion about something. It's really interesting. I think that with the reverb tails and some of the dreamier sort of like aesthetics and textures that we have within the piece, when you discuss them in line with the harshness of the drive and stuff like that, you just have this wonderful sort of juxtaposition that almost works in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting. It's got its kind of, it just elicits the sense of frustration or uncertainty that we're feeling, those negative sort of like, especially with the vocal parts there, but we're also, the sounds around us are trying to reassure it that everything's going to be okay, aside from when things occasionally sort of like pulse, you know, or wriggle and writhe around the sides. But again, there's a nice bit of activity. The drums with very sort of drum grooves there. The guitar is nice and supportive, despite how kind of like the journeys that they go on with the different progressions and extensions. And I think that it just goes to show, if anything else, the kind of abrasive textures on the sides of the stereo field, that we just do have adequate dynamic range within this, or at the very least, the post-production is very well done. There's even like a sort of a swing groove, dun 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 dun, with those kicks, highlighting certain like offbeats or syncopated parts really neatly. I do like how gentle and chilled out this track is. There's been nothing within this album which has been horrifically heavy or anything like that, but there is a sense of discomfort with some parts. Like, you can tell they're going through stuff, but they're trying to make it palatable at the same time, or easier to listen to, without being disingenuous again or cheesy. Thematically, I think, despite some of the kind of like the occasional sort of like lightly clashy notes, it's major oriented because we have found some sort of either melancholic or genuine sort of ending that we could be potentially okay with, if not happy. And I like that we're getting to that point there. I think we've gone on a really interesting journey through these 3 tracks, a deliberate decision to listen through them in this order. And I like that we've gotten a happy ending, even with the complexity that is inferred by some of the like 9s or the 7s and stuff like that we could be having within this. There's a classiness to that. They understand what they're doing. And ultimately, yeah, I feel like I've had a great time with this one in particular. It's interesting. It's got a kind of, I'm going to be thinking about this music for a bit after this. The studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, aside from what I mentioned about the kind of pulse, the writhing of things raising in the sides of the stereo field, like I can tell though that they've just handled their production really neatly. They would have mixed in stereo and mono and understood that it sounds that like it's a deliberate decision on their part. There have been no accidents. And music doesn't need to be comfortable sounding in order to be effective. I just haven't figured out how that relates yet. I probably will listen to this later on and go, oh, I get it now. The drum, guitar, bass, vocal production, the reverbs and distortions, etc. are very well handled there. There's no weird resonant frequencies in the stereo field. The bass is nicely played underneath there, very supportive generally of the root notes as well as outside of that. No issues with clipping. There's dynamic range, nice automation with the fade out later on. Music surrounds you in the headphones, nice and lush, and nice and loud. Bit of pumping, compression limiting is handled. Ultimately, very happy with these 3 tracks, and we're going to talk about them more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of these 3 tracks from an act named Cicada, titled Qingadao, Terminal Lucidity, as well as Afterlife. In this section, we're going to be providing an overall song analysis of these 3 tracks, from lyrics and vocals, all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally, my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think these tracks are about? I think that these tracks in order are more sort of discussing, from Qingadao being about wanting someone to find the darkness or sort of pin them on the wall, make a decision on how they want to interact with them, show me the truth, or sort of like just get it over and done with. Terminal lucidity sort of revolving or moving toward, kind of wondering why we sort of fly towards the light in the first place, and sort of like the difficulties of that, and understanding how we've been affected and sort of hurt by things, but why we continue to try and find it. And Afterlife, I think, is inevitably about going through these difficulties, trials and tribulations, but understanding that eventually, as long as we try and work stuff out, we'll get to a better place in the end. It's an interesting tale. It really is. I've said interesting a lot. It's wonderful to listen to this kind of maturity of storytelling from people that I review. I like when I feel like I've been on a little adventure. The vocals throughout are fantastic. I like that we're very comfortable in the hidden chest voice for the falsetto as well. Variety of different distortion and reverb tails there. We have lots of call and responses, differently filtered and EQ'd parts there. We have some spoken parts with the distortion, kind of like harsher, kind of noisy textures and terminal acidity, which was fascinating, as well as clear understanding of how to pan vocals in order to not interfere with those. And yeah, our vocal production is absolutely stellar. I like the variety of different melodies and harmonies it represents as well. We're not comfortable with sort of taking the listener's attention for granted. And the expression in general is really neat. We're very sort of patient, even though we understand we've got some sort of brittle parts in it. We really are sort of trying to communicate that we're just kind of tired, or just trying to sort of approach it from maybe like a feeling of detachment, despite our awareness of how difficult and of these things have been. I just think that it's a really impressive effort. Sincerely, I think it's really cool, and it shows a lot of promise. These tracks are between 2 and 5 minutes, with terminal acidity being about, I don't remember, like 4.5, and I think the other two are around 2.5 minutes. And I dig that. I think that there's absolutely no filler within these. A variety of different sort of like verse and sort of like storytelling stanzas there. And I dig that we're comfortable moving between several sections of a piece whilst allowing a lot of these tracks to have instrumental breaks of their own, as well as spoken and sung parts going between those, layering them, interacting, etc. We're also very sort of comfortable exploring the full range, both in terms of the instrumental parts, not necessarily. I mean, the drums are relatively low-key throughout a lot of this. The drums are typically kicks, snares, and cymbals with some rims and afterlife, as well as some occasional tom fills. I just don't really think we needed the drums to do too much sort of overplaying here. They were typically pocketing, but again, the quarters, eighths, and 16ths were handled very well, with a mixture of straight 4/4 and then I think swing, if I'm not mistaken, and afterlife with the mild sort of subdued bounciness of it. But the drums are very well handled here, and we know to sort of like have them step back a little bit, such as in the spoken parts of terminal acidity, that allow things to float and to breathe. And I think that's just very sensible songwriting. The guitars have a variety of different sort of distorted, sort of like this sort of like subleads, like in terminal acidity there, with the pentatonics, majors and minors, hammer-ons, applause, should I say. There's lots of major and minor chords, flat nines, extended chords there, maybe some dominant sevenths occasionally, maybe some susses, just a wide variety of different ways, maybe some diminished in Qingadao there, but we're very aware of our music theory. We understand how to go between these chords and add like the parallel major modulation of terminal acidity. We're very aware of how to have these lead the listener by the nose and kind of get them to feel certain things. We know how to sort of add almost a melancholic sort of display to things with the lack of a resolution to certain parts. We can fingerstyle and arpeggiate and sort of play chords and strum and do all the sort of fundamentals of the guitar work. We also have these interesting kind of fade and wow, like we play with the envelopes, the attacks, the reverbs, the decay tails of these different takes as well, and explore different interesting ways of producing the guitars. And I like that we're both treating the guitar with its steel strings as like a raw texture in a respectful way, whilst also having fun with different styles of putting it forward in different sort of they almost sound like kind of synthy at some points, you know. The bass playing underneath is typically more sort of like representative of like your kind of fundamentals of the root notes and sticking with the quarter eighths and 16ths, but it also explores a little bit there and has a bit of fun around the fretboard. It's very much kind of respectful in the same way that the drums are. The drums, there's different drum kits as well, I should mention. There's some sort of like different sort of room sounds and sort of like maybe some sample kits, but ultimately just they typically sort of represent the mood that they want to very well, and they never feel too alien from the guitar or bass parts. Ultimately, whatever the vocals are doing is nicely sort of entrenched what the guitars, bass, and drums are doing. The only point of tension I mentioned compositionally was with Afterlife, with those kind of parts which kind of go up in loudness on the sides, but I've already spoken about that a lot. Everything else is really fantastic. I like the different colors, and thematically these tracks are very intriguing, in part due to the varied guitar parts, as well as how the vocals, the mains and sort of like highs and harmonies sort of overlap on top of that. Ultimately, just really effective songwriting. I've got no complaints about it. It's very sophisticated and interesting to listen. I've said interesting a lot. Entrancing. Honestly, I feel confident with Cicada knowing that whatever songs they're going to release, they are going to be worth your time in part, especially if you like this kind of ambient sort of indie experimental rocky kind of stuff there. I like that they're not just pushing the envelope, that they're trying to do lots of exciting things, and that they can present these different stories with this kind of this sort of like multifaceted, multi-level kind of stuff is really neat. You know, we either go parallel modulated majors to add a sort of a sort of a major tone to serial major tone to the distorted parts, or we're kind of adding a whole bunch of different chord types in order to sort of make it seem a bit more sort of confusing or uncertain. You know, we know what we're doing. I just think it's worth noting that it never feels too much. Balance things really neatly and never make it seem too intense or overwhelming, and I appreciate that. It makes it easier to digest. Even when there's busier parts, again, like the end of Terminal Lucidity with the lead guitarist with the spoken parts, and it was maybe not as clear to understand. It's still very, very good. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, vocals, guitar, bass, drums, and everything else, including the Cicada sounds we had in Terminal Lucidity, are very well presented, and spoken parts with distortion and the kind of fuzz to it was really neat as well. There's no weird resonant frequency in the stereo field. Music surrounds you in the headphones with lots of panning and automation positioning and stuff. There's a fade out at the end of Afterlife, which I really dig, as well as just a nice sort of friendly way to finish. And evidently we just, again, with lots of different distortion reverb, delay tails on things there, some rotary and some of the Qingadao guitars as well there. It's just very colorful, and they've put a lot of love into it. There's dynamic range, things aren't too squeezed. There's distinct textures per instrument as well, so there's been clear, deliberate thought into them to make them sound a bit more sort of distinct and easy to remember. And the vocals have sort of production consistency across it without being overproduced. You know, you can hear this and go, I hear Cicada when I listen to this. You haven't lost the essence of the vocalist. You've just got like everything else here. It's nice and loud, bit of pumping, bus compression limiting is handled. No real applicable constructive critique outside of the thing I mentioned with Afterlife, and that was more deliberate thing on their part, I think, due to the production style. General listener's perspective, I've heard more of Cicada now, and I love their work. I think they're a great band. I think that if they continue to do this, I kind of understand a bit of the journey that we're going on. I can see some stories kind of coming into play. I think including the Cicada into the topic or cadence of it is really neat. I haven't really heard it represented like this. I wonder what they can do with it. I hope they can find an audience. I wish them the best of luck in future, because this is my review of these 3 tracks from Cicada, Qingadao, Terminal Lucidity, and Afterlife, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via their various social medias and their YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as you need to help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.